I know, I can't believe it either. 2 game reviews in 1 month. This could almost become a thing. Hello friends, neighbors, and fellow VEDSies, Arcana here once again to review another game of my childhood. Actually, several games from my childhood. Because today we are going to take a look at games from the Learning Company. Anyone who was a child attending elementary school in the 1990s is probably already familiar with games from the Learning Company. They are responsible for educational PC games such as the Oregon Trail, Word and Number Munchers, and the various exploits of Carmen Sandiego. Basically, if it was a computer game that you were allowed to play in elementary school, it was probably made by the Learning Company. And a number of these games were games from my childhood, but probably the ones that were the biggest part of my childhood were the games from the Super Solvers series. These were puzzle games that had you as the Super Solver, an ambiguously gendered, ambiguously aged person in a blue hoodie, red cap, sneakers, and a backpack with whatever tools you happened to need for the game you were playing, wandering through various landscapes, solving puzzles, and trying to thwart the mischievous plans of the evil and really more mischievous than evil, Morty Maxwell, the self-proclaimed Master of Mischief. At this point, there are probably about a dozen games in the Super Solver series, but when I was growing up, there were 9 in particular that I played quite a bit. In fact, as far as PC games went, when I was a kid, these were primarily the games that I played before I discovered Myst. And because a lot of these games are really kind of similar, I decided rather than doing an individual review for each of these games, I just do one big review for all of the Learning Company Super Solver games that I played as a kid. So we're specifically going to look at 9 games today, and these 9 games are divided up into 3 tiers based on age and difficulty. The plot of each game is pretty much the same. You have to thwart the mischievous plans of Morty Maxwell, who has either stolen something or taken over something, or is in some way causing mischief or challenging you. And you do this by solving clues, many times clues that were left by Morty Maxwell himself, because he's one of those villains who is so confident in his abilities that he figures he can just leave you clues and you'll never be able to solve them and thwart his plans. And these clues in some way related to skills of literacy or math or whatever it is you happen to be learning through this particular game. Now there are 9 games we're going to be looking at today, and they're divided into 3 age groups. First, we have the Treasure series, designed for very young children, about 5 or 6, first or 2nd grade. And the Treasure series does actually form kind of a weird trilogy with Morty Maxwell's various plans and you thwarting them. So let's start with the very first in this trilogy, Treasure Mountain. Treasure Mountain is a mystical mountain with treasures, as its name would imply, and Morty Maxwell has taken it over and stolen the crown. In order to stop him, you as the Super Solver have to travel through the mountain and find all of the treasures that have been hidden behind various pieces of the landscape. How this would actually defeat Morty Maxwell, I don't really know, but if we start questioning the logic of this, then the whole thing falls apart. So you have to make your way up to the top of the mountains on 3 different levels. On each level, you have to find a certain number of treasures and the key to the next level on the mountain. How do you find these things? Elves, of course. You have to capture elves in your net, and if you capture any elf on the mountain, then they will give you a gold coin, which you can then use to both look behind pieces of scenery and buy more nets. But some of the elves are walking around holding scrolls, and if you catch one of them, then you will have to answer their question, which will test your basic literacy or math skills, and then you will receive one of 3 clue words. These are words that describe some of the pieces of scenery that you have been walking past. If you walk past a piece of scenery that matches 2 of these 3 description words, then it will have a treasure behind it. If it matches all 3 of the description words, it will have the key. Then you go up to the next level, do the same thing all over again, and after you do this with all 3 levels, you finally get to the top of the mountain, return the treasures that you have found, and then go back down to the bottom and do the whole thing over again until you find all the treasures. And that's pretty much it. As you progress through the ranks and find more and more treasures, the questions become harder and you have obstacles like elves who will steal your coins, but other than that, it doesn't really change all that much. Once you have defeated Morty Maxwell, then he escapes from Treasure Mountain and crosses the Rainbow Bridge to Invention Island for the beginning of the game, Treasure Cove. Morty Maxwell has destroyed the Rainbow Bridge and is holed up on Invention Island working on his inventions, and he has found a substance at the bottom of the ocean which he believes will help him with these inventions. But something goes horribly wrong, there are all sorts of holes in the oceans now, and this substance, known as the goobies, are now polluting the ocean. So, you know, nice little 90s environmental message there. So once again, you have to defeat Morty Maxwell, but this time you are in the ocean. And Treasure Cove is basically the same game as Treasure Mountain, but replace the elves with magical starfish, replace your net with an air gun and replace your gold coins with a flashlight that you can use to look behind things. Also, instead of searching for treasures, you are searching for gems to help rebuild the Rainbow Bridge, and instead of searching for a key to the next level, you are searching for a pufferfish, which will plug the hole where the goobies are coming out, and then you will get to go to the next level. Also, there's sharks. Treasure Cove does offer a little bit more than Treasure Mountain. There's a little more to explore. There are a few more nooks and crannies and Easter eggs and so on. And plus, you have the constant presence of the goobies, which get more aggressive and numerous as you progress through the game. And these goobies will hurt you, or at least take away your light energy. But again, essentially the same. You defeat Morty Maxwell, he escapes, and then he returns to Treasure Mountain in Treasure Math Storm. In Treasure Math Storm, Morty Maxwell has invented a machine that can change the weather, and he has used it to plunge Treasure Mountain into an apocalyptic winter, which as a kid I actually thought was pretty cool, because it's Treasure Mountain, but with a lot of things like frozen or destroyed. I was a morbid child. So once again, you have to climb the 3 tiers of the mountain and get to the top and return the treasures and defeat Morty Maxwell in that way, but it's a little bit different this time because Treasure Math Storm, as the name implies, is a math-based game. So you're still catching elves, but this time the elves give you a basic arithmetic problem, and when you answer it correctly, they will give you a number of snowballs, and there are piles of snowballs spread throughout the different levels, and you have to put down the right number of snowballs, and then a treasure will magically appear behind it. Again, don't question the logic. So that's how you get the treasures, but how do you get the keys to the next level? Well, now you have to go into the caves that were basically just Easter eggs in the first game and solve more complicated math problems like telling time, weighing things on scales, or counting things. Perform these tasks correctly and you will be given the tools that you need to climb to the next level of the mountain. You can also just go to the store and buy them, but then you have to make exact change and nobody likes doing that. Now there is a 4th treasure game called Treasure Galaxy, but it came out way after I was young enough to play it, and so I never really played it and don't really know everything that is entailed in that game, but from what I've read, it's basically the same idea. Collect things, overthrow Morty Maxwell. Now there are 2 things to make note of in the treasure games. First is that they're very repetitive. You basically play the same levels over and over again, and they only get slightly more difficult as you go, which is nice if you're a little kid and don't mind things being repetitive, but when you're a little bit older, it starts to get pretty exhausting after a while. And also with the treasure games, there's really no way to lose a game. If you answer a question wrong, you just catch the elf or the starfish and you answer it again. If you run out of gold or light, no problem, just catch an elf or a starfish and get some more. If you run out of nets or air, no problem, just go buy some more from wherever you can buy them. And if by some unlucky circumstance you run out of both, well, just keep walking or swimming around and eventually more will be provided for you. So really the only way to lose any of the treasure games is just to stop playing and give up. But the next level of games for slightly older elementary school kids are a little bit different. These are the games that take place in the fictional town of Shady Glen, a nice enough place to live if you don't count all the mischief that is caused by Morty Maxwell. For example, in Midnight Rescue, Morty Maxwell has declared that he is going to paint the school invisible using invisible paint that he has invented, along with 5 painting robots. But you, as the super solver, can stop him if you can figure out which of the 5 robots Morty Maxwell is disguised as. And again, because Morty Maxwell is that uber-confident supervillain, he has left you clues so that you can figure out, via deductive reasoning, which robot he is disguised as. So you wander through the school and into the various rooms, and throughout you will find clue cards left by Morty Maxwell, which mark different readings that you can go through and read. These are things like school reports, diary entries, newspaper articles, that sort of thing. Once you have read the thing, then the clue will ask you a question about what you just read, and you have to answer, and your answer will be one of 4 clue words. Also, as you're wandering the school, the various painting robots will come after you and attack you, and the only way to stop them is to take their pictures. Once you have taken their pictures and developed them, you'll find that the pictures look a little bit different from the robot that you remember taking the picture of. In addition to the robot himself, you will also see the robot holding something in one hand, have something else standing next to them on the other side, wearing something on their head or face, and saying something, and these 4 things should match up with the 4 clue words that you received. If they match up with all 4, then that robot is Morty Maxwell. And just like with the treasure games, you accumulate points throughout the game, you keep playing over and over again, the questions get harder, the robots get more aggressive, and eventually you get to the top rank and officially defeat Morty Maxwell. Outnumbered works in much the same way, except this time Morty Maxwell has taken over the Shady Glen TV station. This time you have to figure out which room Morty Maxwell is hiding in before midnight in order to stop him from completely taking over the station. Outnumbered is a math-based game, and so in each of the rooms you are solving math-based word problems, usually having to do with some sort of television or radio programming. And there's only one robot this time, a walking television named Telly, and if you stop him with your remote control, you will have to answer a series of arithmetic questions, answer them correctly, and you will be given one of 4 unique symbols. And as you may have already guessed, those 4 symbols should match up with a 4-symbol pattern for one of the 5 rooms that you visit. If it matches up with all 4, then that's where Morty Maxwell is hiding. And then there's Spellbound, where Morty Maxwell has committed the heinous and highly mischievous crime of challenging you to a spelling bee. Well, that's not mischievous at all. But yeah, he basically just challenges you to a spelling bee, and you have to prepare for and compete in a spelling bee. You have to compete in 5 levels of the spelling bee, starting with the classroom, then the school, city, state, and finally the national spelling bee, where you go up against Morty Maxwell himself. Up until then, you're competing against his various robots from Midnight Rescue and Outnumbered. But before you can even qualify for any of these spelling bees, you have to accumulate enough points by playing a number of spelling games, including flashcards, word searches, and crosswords, which will also help you to prepare for the words that you're going to be spelling. Now, one of the nice things about Spellbound is that it appreciated that there were people who were going to get these games that maybe didn't have the most sophisticated computer technology. Typically in a spelling bee, someone tells you the word and you spell it. Obviously, if they were going to just show you the word, then you could just look at it and spell it that way. But this game uses a combination of words that are flashed briefly in front of you and words that are spoken. And if you have a computer that maybe doesn't have the best sound system, like the computer that I grew up with, then you can change the option so that it only flashes the words. But yeah, that's pretty much it. This game is pretty much completely unlike any of the other Super Solver games because you're just preparing for a spelling bee. You're not wandering through a landscape or collecting clues or anything like that. You're just preparing for a spelling bee. But these 3 games do represent a higher level of difficulty, and probably one of the biggest things is that it is possible to lose these games. In Midnight Rescue and Outnumbered, if you run out of time or guess the incorrect robot or room, then you lose the game. And in Spellbound, just like any other spelling bee, if you spell a word incorrectly, you're out. You've lost. The last 3 games are the most difficult games in the Super Solver series that I played, and a couple of them are probably going to get their own reviews at some point, but I'll go through them briefly here too. First we have Gizmos and Gadgets, which I think is technically a part of the Shady Glen series with Midnight Rescue and Outnumbered, but I included it here just because there is a lot going on in this game. Gizmos and Gadgets is a science-based game where Morty Maxwell has taken over the Shady Glen Technology Center. And he has challenged you to a series of 15 races, 5 using air vehicles, 5 using motor vehicles, and 5 using vehicles that use some sort of alternative energy because, again, it was the 90s. Now, in order to compete in these races, you have to build the vehicles, finding the parts in the warehouse and putting them together in the best way possible. So not only do you have to find all the parts that these vehicles require, but you also have to find all the correct parts, the parts that will make the fastest vehicle that will win the race against Morty Maxwell. This means that you actually have to look at the blueprints and read through the description of each of the parts and figure out for yourself which one you should get. And once you actually go to the warehouse to get the parts, there are 3 things that have made this a little bit more challenging. First of all, the warehouse is basically a labyrinth. It's got all sorts of winding hallways and doors and all sorts of things that you have to navigate in order to find the various crates, which are basically spread throughout the warehouse at random. Like, they're not marked as parts that you need, they're just kind of plunked down on the floor, and when you pick them up, you have no idea what's going to be inside them. Second, Morty Maxwell has locked the door with what else? Puzzles. This time science-based puzzles with things like magnets, gears, simple machines, that sort of thing. And third are the cyber chimps, which Morty Maxwell has released into the warehouse, and they are wandering around waiting to attack you and steal whatever parts you happen to have collected already. The only way to stop them is to throw bananas at them and put them to sleep, when they will then drop one of the things that they are holding, but it might not necessarily be a thing that they stole from you, it's just going to be another random thing. And because of the complexity of the rest of the game, they do give you an option at the beginning of the game to play without the chimps. You can just wander through the warehouse and solve the puzzles and not have to worry about being attacked, which is probably why this game is on the lower difficulty level from the other 2 games. But there's a lot involved with this game. Apart from the science aspect of it, there's also a great deal of strategy and logical thinking, which is also the basis of the next game, Ancient Empires. In Ancient Empires, you are wandering through an ancient cave looking for buried treasures from the ancient world. You have to navigate through each of the caves, usually solving some sort of puzzle to get into the next room, collecting the different pieces of the artifact, and avoiding dangerous creatures like spiders and bats. There are 4 different worlds that you can visit, each one with 4 levels, and each of the different worlds has a different kind of puzzle for you to solve. In the Near East, you have to manipulate a series of buttons and foot switches in order to open the right series of doors or sliding panels. In Egypt, you use a series of reflectors and light from your helmet in order to hit the right number of switches in order to move the panels aside. In India and China, you have to manipulate a series of conveyor belts moving in the right direction. And in Greece and Rome, you have to hit a series of gongs with Greek letters on them in the right order in order to move panels aside. Once you have gone through all 4 of these worlds, you then go to the Ancient World, another 4 levels which combines all the puzzles of the previous 4 worlds. Now, Ancient Empires also gives you the opportunity to play on 2 difficulty levels, the Explorer level, which is a little bit easier, and the Expert level, which is the same series of rooms and caves, but with slightly harder puzzles and more aggressive animals. Once you've collected the 6 pieces of the artifacts, you then have to assemble them correctly, and then you'll get a little bit of information about the artifact that's interesting, but not really necessary for you to continue playing the game. So the game will help you learn more about ancient empires and ancient artifacts, but it's not really necessary to play the game. What is necessary to play the game are your skills of logic and strategy and reasoning. And then finally we have Operation Neptune, which will definitely be getting its own review. Operation Neptune is another math-based game, and in my opinion, the most difficult of the Super Solver series. Operation Neptune doesn't even feel like a part of the Super Solver series because you're not the typical Super Solver, you're not even referred to as a Super Solver, and Morty Maxwell doesn't feature in this story at all. To be fair, he didn't really feature into Ancient Empires either, he just kind of looks like a rival archaeologist, but he's not really doing anything against you, he's just kind of there. But in Operation Neptune, you don't see him at all. Instead, you are trying to collect pieces of a space capsule that has fallen into the ocean. So you navigate through a very treacherous ocean terrain through all of these different ocean creatures, and you try to find these different artifacts. Along the way, you will receive notifications from your ship's computer or from the surface ship, which will give you various problems to solve. These, of course, are your math problems that'll teach you the skills that you're supposed to learn, but they also make sense in the context of the game. Where in the other games you were just solving puzzles for the sake of solving puzzles, here you're actually figuring out problems like adjusting your ballast or navigating the terrain or reporting back on your progress, that sort of thing. So it really gives you the sense of the practical applications of the math that you're learning. There are 15 levels to navigate, and on each level you have to find a log entry, but the log entries aren't presented to you in chronological order. They are out of order because they fell randomly into the ocean. And so you get the story of what happened bit by bit. So there is actually an interesting story with this game, which is another one of the reasons why I really like it. And just like with Ancient Empires, there are 2 difficulty levels, but unlike Ancient Empires, the second harder difficulty level actually gives you 15 completely new terrains to explore. So there are actually 30 levels altogether, each of them unique in their own way, which is kind of cool. That's the general idea, but like I said, I'm going to give a separate review for this particular game because I just really like it. I think it's a really great game. Now, what you find with the last 2 games in particular, Ancient Empires and Operation Neptune, is that not only is it possible to lose in these games, but it's actually possible to die. The danger here is not being attacked by robots or elves and getting things stolen from you. The danger here is being attacked by dangerous cave or sea creatures and losing your energy. So there definitely seems to be more at stake in these 2 games, and you're also doing a lot more with practical applications in all 3 of the last games that we talked about. The other games were pretty abstract and silly, but these games actually do have you doing something that you might actually do in the real world. Overall, I feel like the Super Solver series is a really solid bunch of educational games. The skills that they're teaching are very intelligently incorporated in with the games, and the games are interesting and exciting and creative enough to captivate the imaginations of children. The games for the younger kids do get a little bit repetitive, and it is nice to see a little bit more variety in the games for the older kids, but that again kind of goes along with aging children and aging maturity levels. Now, the games that I'm talking about and the screenshots that you've seen have been from the DOS versions of the game, which probably aren't really available anymore unless you go to archive.org, where they have all sorts of different DOS games from the 90s that you can play. There are some updated versions of these games, but I honestly haven't played any of them, nor have I played any of the newer games that they've come out with in this series. But on the basis of these 9 games and my memories of them from my childhood, solid bunch of games. The foundation is definitely sound, and on the worth meter, I would give these a worth playing once. Because once you've played them once, you've learned the skills and you don't need to play them anymore. Unless you're a nostalgia nut like me. And that does it for this game from my childhood review. Now, did you find all the words?